Welcome or welcome back to another episode of Elevate Your AIQ. In this session, I reconnect with my super smart friend, Remy Glaisner, a respected voice in talent intelligence, market research, and HR strategies, and a fellow member of the Talent Intelligence Collective community. Remy shares insights from his multifaceted background in areas such as automation and HR, exploring the rise of skills-based organizations and the critical role of human skills in shaping modern teams. We talk about the transformative impact of AI agents on HR and workforce planning. We touch on AI governance and the importance of data integrity, and we discuss the importance of fostering a culture of continuous learning and collaboration. In the talent intelligence community, we often talk about how organizations can harness total talent intelligence to adapt to market shifts, and Remy and I certainly hit on this, and what it means from both data and organizational perspectives. I always have engaging and insightful conversations with Remy, so I know you'll appreciate that we finally recorded one. Enjoy it, and thanks for listening. Hi, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Elevate Your AIQ. I'm your host, Bob Pulver, and this morning I'm catching up with my friend Remy Glaisner. How you doing today, Remy?
I'm doing fantastic, Bob. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Thanks for joining me. We finally get to record one of our hopefully insightful conversations. Why don't we kick things off with you just giving folks a little bit about your background? You've done a lot of really interesting work over your career. I'd love to hear about it.
Sure, yeah, no problem. I'm an engineer by training, automation engineer by training. It was a long time ago now. Never really practiced that, but I always kept, that kind of like technical kind of spirit inside of me. So stop playing with that. But very, very soon in my career, I jumped into the business side of things. I'm an ex-gardener, spent my 7, 8 years there. I did my duty, service duty.
Yep.
Was also with IDC for a while, research director. I was running a little consultancy business covering like robotics, automation, intelligence things. So pretty familiar with all sort of concept around AI, although not necessarily like Gen AI that has just popped up recently. And most recently, about like 3, 4 years ago, I joined AWS. Didn't stay very very long there, but that's where I would say my career shifted from anything automation, anything robotics, anything intelligent system to something more HR. As a matter of fact, when I joined AWS, I was part of HR for the first time in my life. I was part of HR. So I would say I would describe myself as I fell in love with a lot of things like talent intelligence, like the use of the data and algorithmic technologies in different ways, and I'm kind of attached to that. But that's well, I cannot say like, oh, I got 10 or 20 years of experience into that. And most recently, like the past 2, 3 years, or 2 years actually, been consulting with various companies, helping people, playing advisor here and there. Some companies are solution providers in the talent space at large, so like playing a little bit with them and how do you do marketing, how do you design product, how do you do this and that, and sometimes also on the user side, which is actually mostly what I've been doing. Anything related to like, hey, let's be a skills based company or something or organization, something like that. What do we do with that? Just trying to help them thinking. In a nutshell, that's me.
So when you were at these analyst firms, you weren't necessarily focused on even HR technology at all, even though you weren't.
To that point, I would say somehow a lot of those technologies were very similar and used in a similar way in the sense that that was for operations. Whether you use that on the shop floor for manufacturing or you are trying to do something in HR, you're trying to be more efficient. How you use that, maybe the endpoint technology might be different. But frankly, like the goals you have, the way you want to serve the business and then the business and everything, they are strikingly exactly the same.
Yeah, I think that mirrors a lot of the perspective that I've taken when I try to sort of frame some of my prior, assignments. I mean, even when I was at IBM for over 2 decades, I mean, I did a lot of very different things. It wasn't like I think in the past people have looked at, careers. Oh, you spent all this time at one particular organization. Didn't you get, bored? Didn't you feel like stagnant or whatever? It's like, well, no, because at a company like that, it's so big and there's so many different, divisions and lines of business and areas that you can focus, and you can take some of the skills and knowledge that you have acquired for each of those and repurpose that in these other contexts. So it sounds like you were able to do that successfully as well.
That's exactly that. I mean, at least that's what I'm trying to do. Is like as I usually put it, is like try to bring a fair and maybe a strong sense of business into like the HR, I would say, way of thinking. Not that the HR way of thinking is wrong at all, but just like how do you, like, when you say you want to align to the business, what does that mean exactly? How do you do that? Those are topics that I'm working on. Like I was talking about skill-based organization, kind of thing I'm doing is not how do we hire better, but how does the skill-based organization help? Not just aligning, but like make the organization more competitive. Because at the end of the day, that's just what it is.
We'll definitely dive into this skills based organization topic, but it's nice to hear someone else's experience where you've really gotten a sense of how this business operates. One of the pieces of advice that I got from an old mentor at IBM was know your business, don't just preside over it.
Mhm.
Part of that is, getting that exposure in these different areas. And so in a single role, maybe you get that with like a chief of staff kind of role, which I've held a couple times. But otherwise, you've got to always be looking for opportunities. If even if the organization doesn't explicitly sort of encourage that, I mean, that's more of a recent phenomenon where we've seen advancements in internal mobility and things like that. But I think to your point, you have all these people who are loyal and they've been developing skills. They have the tacit, knowledge and the domain knowledge, and they understand what your company is trying to achieve. So why not put a lot more effort into that and your existing workforce and increasing what seems to be a trend of decreasing tenures? Why not try to reverse that trend and keep people, engaged and happy and showing them that you're investing in their career as opposed to spending, 6x or 8x or whatever it is to find net new people.
Well, first, I don't really define it. I think, and that's, by the way, something that, I see a lot with all my HR friends, like, very, very soon, when something new pops up, people try to define things. And I think it's good, but it's also like not so good. It's good because it allows people to kind of talk about the same thing in a way, but it's also like it limits a lot what it is. If I say, okay, skill-based organization, it's about, using skill to define how the workforce work and how we will plan it and how we will hire and everything. But then I limit skill-based organization to something very HR. And to me, it's not so much like what is or how do I define the SPO, but the point where the business and HR actually start to communicate differently, start envisioning the business differently. The way I usually talk about it is HR tend to see skills like money on a bank account or currency on a bank account. With different currencies, you want, I mean, it's very like, I call that 2D. So you got currencies, you got like how many of them do you have, and on and on. The business, on the other side, sees skills at the transaction. In the sense that, I take those skills, when I put them together into a transaction, it creates something. And that's how the business works. And somehow skills, when you do that, it's just the exact same coin. You're just looking at two different faces of that coin. And it's both, like, both sides will say, yeah, yeah, I understand that. But actually making it work is something more complicated. And I think, to me, an SBO is a company, an organization that has understood how to look at both sides of the coin at the same time and take advantage of it.
My understanding of how HR has approached this has been some reluctance to take on some of the heavy lifting, I'll call it. And so I wonder how progressive organizations are like communicating the value of what you just described and how to sort of make that shift, right? Because there will be naysayers that say, "Oh, here we go again with skills. Haven't we always been hiring, for
Yeah.
skills and competencies or whatever?"
Skills is not something, it's not something static first. So like, when and actually a lot of organizations have been falling into kind of I won't say that trap, but kind of trying to map out all the skills we have everywhere in a very very precise way. It's
Yep.
good, and it's also not so good because the moment you're done with that, what you said when you from when you started, it might have changed. It's not exactly the same, and it's
Yeah.
great. But what do you do exactly with that? So, do you need to define everything? Do you need to map out your entire organization? Do you need to have like such a level of granularity when you do it? There's something that you might not actually need right away, and I'm thinking about anything that is kind of like process like. Say, for example, well, when we say an organization is in manufacturing and you have to build a new factory. Whenever you build a new factory to do the same product, you will need so many people that will have so many skills on them. So basically, if the business decide yes, we need a new factory, you don't necessarily need to like map out all the skills and everything. You already know how to do that. What you need to map out is when you are actually facing something where it doesn't kind of like a usual process doesn't apply. When something that the market creates a variable that you don't know. What do we need to have? What do we need to get? What do we exactly have in bank and everything? And those actually are usually only 10 or 20% of the entire organization. And they're very specific. But like understanding what will actually correspond to something the business really know how to do, to something the business will have to respond as fast as possible, this is where it starts. And this is probably the value. And the value is, if I reframe that, is well, when you will have to respond to that, thanks to our scalable organization, you will be not only be able to anticipate it, but to create scenarios around that, so to play around with it, like, oh, if I do that, what will happen? Will help you from a talent perspective to understand what the implications are and help you just make the decision even before they happen. That's great value for the business, because if something happened, market dynamics, something happened, you can like commit whatever $1 million on hiring whoever. Well, if you're late in the game, you're late in the game. You're not as competitive as the next door competitors. But if you can actually anticipate all that, then you win. And again, it doesn't necessarily take to map out all the skills of an organization and not so precisely. It just means that you understand how the business works and what the business might face as something that is unexpected in the sense that not following usual process or the usual way the organization is working.
I absolutely appreciate everything that you're describing. I guess I just view it as one of the key components of your sort of agile strategy, right? Like, how will you be able to anticipate those market shifts? To your point, how do you,
Best respond to them, yes.
yeah, how do you enter a new market without proactively understanding what you'll need and where a gap may exist, or how do you shift from, using your example with manufacturing? If you're an automotive manufacturer and all of a sudden you decide to shift to electric vehicles,
Mhm.
what are you going to do? Yeah, you might set up a new factory and assembly line and all of that, but you're obviously going to have some degree of skills gap that you need to understand, and now you need to look and say, okay, well, what do I know about transferable skills from these roles on a typical internal combustion assembly line versus whatever. There's definitely a lot of overlap. A car is already, even an internal combustion engine car is already sort of a computer on wheels to some degree, right? So there's definitely some pieces of that are overlapping. But yeah, there's going to be net new skills that you need to acquire and make those adjustments. So I mean, I think this ties into a lot of what you and I discuss with the community and Talent Intelligence Collective, which is how do you take all of this, skills data and the people analytics data and the talent intelligence, which might be looking outward versus people analytics looking inward. How do you take all of that and do proper sort of scenario planning? And to your earlier point, you can't just take all this time to do like this skills inventory at a granular level, because by the time you're done, things have changed. And
And I would say like it's not that the all the inventory is necessarily bad. It's just like don't start with that. That would be my recommendation. Also, in the I think the example, like the illustration you were giving with like the of the manufacturer is great. I was talking about scenarios before. That's exactly that. It's like scenario one, we have some of the skill to move that. So do we upskill? Do we get new people? Scenario two, we just get new people. Scenario three could be like another combination of things. But that's something that HR will be able to offer, and very detailed pros and cons on doing that. But doing it like it's before it happens, in the sense that the business might be thinking and scratching their bill, like, hey, should we do that? Well, HR immediately can say, well, from a time perspective, here's what will happen. Here is how it will impact our competitiveness in the market. Here is how fast we can do that. Here is how realistic that is. And that the business needs to know.
Yeah, for sure. I guess the other thing I wanted to ask you about was the skills exercises where you talk about like skills intelligence and skills, gap analysis and all of that. Do you see that focusing enough on like what we used to call soft skills?
Yes.
Because most of the discussions that I've seen and participated in, they seem to be focusing on the hard, technical, more tangible
Yes.
skills. Validating those skills can still be a challenge. So there's still some potentially some subjectivity there, but there's more subjectivity perhaps on the human skills because there's just so many ways to try to so many different types of assessments and whatever, and
Mhm.
everyone thinks it's snake oil or it's not grounded in science or academia or whatever. So I guess I just wonder from your perspective, being much deeper into the skill space these days than me, like how you think about that.
That's a good question. I would say right now, what's happening, people are more focusing on like hard skills, right? Usually pretty technical skills, like something that can be indeed measured or assessed or something like that. Now, do you like the soft skill have to be taken into consideration? I think yes. But let me backtrack just 1 second here. When you talk about skills, and that's actually one of the complications that come with skills, is you can talk about skills at the individual level, you, me. So then, in that case, yes, talking about soft skills or like how you communicate, do whatever, it's very important. We can also talk about skills at team level, at business unit level, as something like that. And then in those cases, um, maybe some form of soft skill will actually surface, but not always. It's more like again, it's if soft skills enable faster transaction of skills for the business, then soft skills are very important. Soft skills are not helping or not changing fundamentally how those skill transaction existing, then it's nice to have. And that's also, by the way, you prioritize, should I do that or not? Linking that, by the way, to I think AI is probably like the way to potentially start to integrate that and to see, well, how into the mix does it really play or not? I don't have an answer to your question, should we do that or not? But if we could either assess or I don't like assessing necessarily, like, observe how some individual are having like XYZ soft skills and on top of like hard skills. How do they play together? How do we record that? And now with AI, we can manipulate a lot more data, more information about like those skills, a lot more defining part of skills. Then
Welcome to the Hire Her podcast, where women in talent call all the shots. We know, another recruiting podcast, just what the industry needs. Okay, but hear us out. You ever spend hours sourcing that perfect candidate, but they end up ghosting you harder than your hinge date? Or finally, you get that hiring manager feedback, only for them to, of course, say, "Can we see more candidates?" Lame, right? But let's talk about what's really lame in the industry. How is it that 65% of recruiters are brilliant women, yet most of the decision makers look like a convention for middle-aged dudes named Brad?
That's where we come in. Hire Her isn't just another podcast about hiring trends you already heard like 50 times this week. We're here to elevate women in talent, share their career journeys, and make sure they take the lead. Because let's face it, if recruiting is the backbone of every company, why are we still fighting for a seat at the table? So whether you're a recruiter, a talent leader, or just someone trying to swim through the sausage fest of TA leadership, we got you, girl. Welcome to Hire Her, the recruiting podcast where women's voices aren't just heard, but they're leading the conversation.
So subscribe now, because middle management Brad sure as hell isn't going to do it for you.
Yes, I mean, we might discover that in some cases it's very important, and we know that. I mean, people cannot communicate very well. I mean, in one way, they might, I mean, say verbally, they might do very well, in written part, and that might be great in some occasion. That might be not so great in other occasion. How do we play with that? So that might be, it has an importance. Is it being done? Probably not, or not so much, but it should be.
I guess it depends on the nature of the work and the industry, and you've got to look at the balance of efficiency versus effectiveness, or whether you're really prioritizing the experience of a particular persona versus just, again, trying to put everything under like a productivity kind of
Yeah.
lens, right?
Not everything should be like under productivity or efficiency. And that's actually where maybe like something more HR-like support the business. If you, thanks to skills, based, whatever, new framework you use, you start creating teams made of people who won't go along together at all, who potentially will make that super critical team explode in 6 months. Well, you should actually be able to prevent that, or to tell the business, yes, if we do that, yeah, or we could have like BU1 and BU2 kind of like internally compete about that, and people murdering each other. But that might not work for that reason. Like, we will get like, I don't know, we'll move from 20% of people like, just leaving the company to 40% every year, something like that. That's crazy. We cannot do that. But the business will listen to that if you can, I would say, like, bring data about it. So, yes, it's very important, but it's just like, why? I mean, you just have to find like kind of like the use case, or I would say the business case to which it, creates an importance. It creates like, it decrease or increase the value of what you generate.
That makes sense. I know we've talked about this, and there have been some debates in the talent intelligence collective that you and I have both participated in. But when we think about like this concept of total talent intelligence, right? Bringing together all of this data, wherever the people exist, wherever the skills exist, understanding market dynamics, understanding, skills gaps and all of this stuff, and pulling together everything that we just talked about in a holistic way. Is it your observation that there's some progression towards people realizing how important it is to pull all these things together, breaking down some of the silos where a lot of this sort of people related data exists,
Yeah.
or there's still like, territorial, fights going on, and this is just going to be a perpetual battle?
Yeah, I think this is a good question. I think there will always be some form of battle somewhere. Like, my data is not your data, blah 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 blah. Blah. But I think beyond the concept of tool talent intelligence, I think it's important to think about the intelligent enterprise organization, because that's what it is, and the tool talent intelligence, whatever you want to call that, say like the HR part of that intelligent organization needs to exist and need to like frame itself in a way that will actually integrate well the intelligence enterprise, because that's what matters at the end of the day. You want your organization to be as intelligent as possible. One side of that is the HR side. One Another side of that is the market intelligence. Another side of that is finance intelligence. Another side of, so yes, it has to be done somehow. Now I know that the talent intelligence collective, usually you start bringing a topic and people say, oh, but we'll get data all over the place. It will never work. Sure, yes. But if we start with like it will never work, then let's screw the conversation. And I think it can work. It should work. But again, not necessarily as in just talent for talent intelligence, total talent intelligence, but total talent intelligence in the context of the intelligent organization. So what comes first? What comes second? How should those data be formed, be structured? So it actually helps us at more micro level, like the HR level, maybe like an HR use case level, but also the organization. And that is like the organization part, the more like broad part, like how do we help finance be better at finance because of our talent, total talent intelligence, blah blah blah. That I think is not necessarily through a lot. And I think that I believe that a lot of reluctance right now also come from you know, if I want to be the boss, hey, TI should be the boss and control everything. Or hey, strategic workforce planning is we should be on top of it. Oh no, sir, wait, it's people on it that should do everything. I think it's just about that. It's just like, it's very hard to exist when you're in HR. HR is like, it's a back office thing. It's not always supported very well by the business. Budget unlimited, and on and on and on. You want to be visible, you want to be there, you want to control your things. So I do understand that, the organizational frictions. But at the end of the day, the totally total talent intelligent, totally total workforce planning strategy. Give it the name you want. At the end of the day, what matters is that it supports the intelligent enterprise. If it doesn't, if it just supports the intelligent HR for HR, then you fail, and it won't work.
Absolutely. I think there's similar sort of ownership conversations happening with when it comes to responsible AI, actually, which I know we'll talk a little bit about later. But one of the things that I was thinking about as I spend more time learning about like agentic
Mhm.
AI, creating these AI agents, which are actually like, it's not just robotic process automation, and it's not just an AI sort of assistant or co-pilot. It's not just giving you answers to a question or whatever. It's actually executing something, and there's logic and there's reason. Well, we can debate separately whether it's actually doing its own reasoning or not. But
Yeah.
the point is, it's executing some of these tasks that even 2 years and 2 weeks ago, before ChatGPT came out, we would have thought that these things were sort of the domain of human beings. And so when I think about some of the friction points in with appropriate controls and privacy and whatever around the data elements, so when you can start to sort of embed that and codify that into specific AI agents, and then you set up, the workflows that actually connect those agents and orchestrate the data and the decisions or whatever, and you create this agentic AI sort of environment. One of the use cases that I think about where this would come in handy for HR and beyond is in this sort of total talent intelligence, where you don't have to go and tap somebody in another department to create a net new dashboard, or you don't need to go and find a data scientist or whatever to just give you a specific answer to a challenge that you're facing or whatever. Of you've sort of codified a bunch of expertise into, one of my prior guests called it a digital advisor, but you don't have to actually go and worry about the friction and the scheduling time with this person and da 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 da. So I just wonder, if you've explored some of these
Yeah.
agentic concepts at all and how that might apply to this domain.
Very, very honestly, I haven't been like hands-on so much with agentic AI. But when you think about it, that's not more than the elaborate version of an application. So, if you think about, I mean, and right now, HR or any other like a major function, they already work with a bunch of applications, that live on the cloud or not, most of them on the cloud, that use data XYZ coming from XYZ platform or like data lake or anything. Just like it's another type of maybe interface to play with. To me, it's not just what it is, but that's mostly what it is. So how can it potentially limit friction? Well, yeah, it will limit friction. I mean, it will make reluctant from, I don't know, if you were talking to someone, yeah, I'll do a dashboard later. Don't worry, I'm just reluctant to do it. So it will take me 2 months. I will explain to you how complicated it is to not do it. Okay, you won't have that problem anymore, but you will have other problem. And it's more about, I would say, automating to a level that is like more fluid, a certain function, a certain activity, a certain like it's agentic AI is about doing things when generative AI is about creating things somehow. So just define a box, and like that box will be an agentic. We'll use agentic AI, so we'll be able to like perform some complex task, around XYZ that you define. How is it so different from having like I mean creating some form of a self-serve dashboard that people can use? Well, maybe it will, just do the job a little better, a little faster, make it like, a little more fancy. It won't just be a dashboard. They may be more visualization. Maybe it won't do XYZ, but this is just a layer of practically added to what already exists. So the friction, they will, you suppress them here, they will start to exist there. You know what I mean? And it's not necessarily like a good or bad. Like friction are, when frictions happen, I think it's not necessarily negative. And as a matter of fact, it's often a positive. It means that two different people or functions have different perspective into one thing. And it's not who has the right one. When you see friction, it's about like, hey, tell me about how you see the world. I'll tell you how I see the world. Can we do something together? Now, as I said before in HR, very often, not always, but very often, people are competing for, a little bit of, sunshine, I would say. So that creates like, let me be more right than you are. I think there's a lot of willingness. If those kind of pressure didn't exist, there's a lot of willingness in HR, and that's probably way more than any other usual corporate function to collaborate. But this is where the functions are coming from. So now agentic AI, yes, to your question, they will remove some friction, but only to create some other elsewhere.
Yeah, it's not that any particular agent will be like 100% correct, right? We're still not at the, AI as a calculator. Let's trust it implicitly kind of thing. It's still sort of codified representation of probably could be one person's opinion, as sort of I don't know if digital twin is the right way to think about that, but
Useful twin for that,
yeah,
that's also what it could be.
I mean, hopefully it's incorporated, multiple perspectives and, a whole separate conversation about whether, an AI agent can actually sort of encapsulate the collective intelligence of a group or a team or whatever. But the point is, it's been trained specifically to do a particular function, like an appliance sort of, but give you in natural language, some answer. But when it starts communicating that information on your behalf, to perhaps another agent or to someone in another department or whatever, I mean, there's all kinds of controls that we need to think about. And when I put my responsible AI, hat on, I have to think about how we're actually sort of monitoring those types of things. But it's also an example of,
I agree.
when you think about AI governance and assurance and stuff like that, it's like, if you need to comply with a piece of legislation, then take a snapshot at a point in time at whatever frequency is required, and submit those results or whatever the law requires. But when it comes to mitigating risk and understanding all these other implications way beyond the law, you do need sort of continuous monitoring and observability to understand
Yes.
exactly what's happening and make sure you don't have any weak links or whatever, similar to cybersecurity or privacy, I would imagine.
Let's get back to manufacturing and automation, right? And imagine the AI agent that I'm creating is about designing or putting together, assembling the frame of a car. One company will decide to just like put a piece of, I don't know, aluminum, whatever they use, the metal they use, and to solder it. The other one will actually decide to like glue them together with special glue, blah, blah, blah. Okay. Within the framework of the law, it might be possible. Now, what you cannot do is just use like duct tape. Okay, that the law tell you no. That's kind of the same thing, yeah. But now it's just maybe gluing it is much faster, but will create like over time some recall of all the car you makes because some of the frame have been collapsing. That you cannot know in advance, but you have to monitor that to be able to maybe change it. And I think tomorrow's organization will be the one who are creating. It's not who are using more or less agents, but who are defining what the agents are doing, one to get one with the other, or like on themselves, the best. Uh, and it will kind of like, I think, encapsulate somehow an organization way of doing things. The same way one organization is not the same culture than another. An organization is not competing the same way as another, or has a different approach to markets, or a different view of the world, different like strategy on how they bring product or service to market. It's exactly the same. So keeping an eye on it, yes. And actually, there's a very, very, very strong business case around that. Is my computer is better than I am because of that type, that type of AI agent, okay, that is clearly like we all agree that's the best we can use for that layer of whatever operations or process that we have, then let's keep an eye on. It's, will comply with like the legal framework, blah blah blah, but also that the better job. And that will just go like the competitiveness will just move to another layer. So now like the different assembly of agentic AI, and that's really what it is. It's and that's actually I think will define really what our organization is better than another, our HR function is better than another, our tool talent intelligence administration of data is better than another. It's not just about the agentic AIs. How do you put them together, and what sort of culture of or I would say like personality do you give them?
Yeah, that gets into a whole nother area of how these things are sort of programmed, because I happen to be in a sort of AI agent kind of boot camp right now, and we're learning how to make sure it's speaking in your this sort of brand voice, right? If it's communicating with clients and prospects and doing
Exactly.
customer service or whatever, like if you're going to apply an agent, then don't make it too sort of robotic, too generic. Don't make me choose from one of these five topics and only follow
Mhm.
this set of rules. I mean, that's like a old school conversational chatbot at this point.
And I think a lot of people already know how to. I mean, have probably a good opinion on how to do that well inside in a bigger organization. I'm thinking, like, say, people in marketing. Look, when
The use case podcast is where technology vendors get to talk about themselves. And it's a wonderful place for vendors, investors, and practitioners to listen to the story of the solution, the features, the benefits, the attributes, etc. And we get to know the CEO or founder during the call, and we also get to know the tech. So subscribe to the Use Case Podcast.
we're still using slides, right? And if you work at IBM, when you open PowerPoint, your PowerPoint, will be designed in an IBM way. And if I work for a computer, it will be designed in a different way. That's that transcribe and carry your company, I don't know, logo, like frame like in a certain way, like visual, image, whatever you want to call it, right? This is exactly the same. Just you just take it instead of the platform being like a PowerPoint, now becomes like a way to interact with like a client. It can be a chatbot, it can be whatever you want, but it's exactly the same principle.
The IBM one's an interesting example because of the brand guidelines about how you can use logos and colors, and whether or not you can put another logo next to the IBM logo. I mean, it's incredible. Yeah, a whole team's putting together just the rules about how that needs to work. And it was when Watson came out, it was probably worse because they just didn't want to. It was a risk mitigation strategy in part because they didn't want to dilute the branding of that.
I think we understand each other. It's just like
Yeah,
the same kind of question will arise. It's just like applied to AI or something that use AI. So do you
yeah,
control that? How do you make it, like you said, not to robotics? How do you make it like so it carry well who you are as an organization or what you are as an organization? I would say.
yeah. If I were to sort of summarize some of the key, thoughts we've been talking about, it's like forget about what the AI is capable of for a moment, and just think about some of the fundamentals that go into making these things successful, right? Like I've always contended that your data and analytics maturity in itself is a huge benefit and competitive advantage when you start to build with AI, or just pull your data and some of your proprietary information into an AI solution that you may have procured from a solution provider. But I mean, that's the foundation for anything, that any output you're going to get from that AI. If you don't trust the data and some of the core components of that, then all bets are off. And that is especially true for decision making when it comes to AI solutions in the talent space, right? So certainly looking at DEI. I mean, we can debate whether DEI is properly supported. We can talk about how corporations are reacting these days to DEI initiatives, but the fundamental principle of fairness and impartiality and bias mitigation all goes back to the data. And so you've got to look at that before you start blaming the AI.
How will you do that or not? And by the way, like on the DEI and like the idea of like responsible AI. One thing that came to mind before we start recording on that is people tend to think about responsible AI as how do we use AI responsibly? But I think there's another way of also looking at that is what is our responsibility in actually deploying AI and in the topic of DI, or in the topic of just simply having and I'm just like the use case will be hiring or maybe internal mobility is how AI can actually help an organization to just not do the job of recruiter slightly faster, but really like get to every candidate and try to figure out like deeply how everyone is a fit, but will work over time and what they can bring and blah blah blah. Not just like giving a scoring on how the candidate will be good or not, but it's kind of like giving more chance than what a human will give you. Nowadays, like if you look at a lot of job posting, talent intelligence or workforce planning, well, you have to have like so many years of talent intelligence workforce planning. I mean, you have to come from there, basically. So people like you and I might not have the same chances, and still we work in there and like are pretty successful. So how comes? Well, if an AI could actually ask me more questions, say, hey, read that about your resume or whatever your things, your online profile. Tell me more about it, and I can from there, like, and asking me more questions. Just be having the patience that a human might not have as candidates. I will probably really appreciate that. I will kind of like give myself a chance to defend myself without so much pressure, and actually talking to a system that I will actually like try to really make a balance between like who I am, where I'm coming from, and not or not, and kind of get out of the usual standard of like that's what we're looking for. No, that's not. You're not looking for a candidate that has been doing that, but that you're looking for a candidate that could do that. And over time, and when that will change, we'll be able to go on with the change. So do you want someone who actually has been doing exactly the same for 20 years, or someone who actually has been moving a lot for 20 years? If the role will potentially be exposed to a lot of changes, some pretty brutal, you want someone who's been actually exploding itself to something pretty brutal. And it's there's not one good solution to that, but I think back to the topic, like uh, I think we all have a responsibility to use AI in those moments and to use AI well, to use AI to its full potential. It's sure. It's about like, do we have the right data? Do we build the right algorithm so we don't put people out? But I said yes. And what about we will also make sure that we put everyone in, and that's the responsibility I think we all have when it comes to AI. It's not about like shying away from it and saying like, well, before we use that, let's see what before it created problems. Like you can, I mean, developers have been using Sandbox for a while. Well, just take a sample of your data, do that on the side, test it, track it. It's fine. It's not public. It's there. It's not about hiring someone. It's just about to see like, does it work? Can we be better? Can we hire? And it's not about hiring the best people. It's about hiring the right people. I think HR has a lot into hiring or using the right people. It's HR has a lot into like we want the best of people. We want no, you don't want the best. You want the right.
Yeah. No, there's so many good nuggets in all of that. I think you called out a couple of things. First of all, I think responsibility. You got to be responsible by design, right? And that's
Yeah.
starts with the whoever's building and developing this. It's not just the solution providers anymore, because like we were talking about, anyone can now build a GPT or an agent, and so now everyone sort of takes on some of that responsibility.
It's easier to say it than to do it, but
Yeah. But the other is, just even going back to your point about, the role as it's defined, we spend so much time worrying about matching, job descriptions to CVs, and there are so many problems. I mean, we could spend a whole other hour talking about why that's such a bad idea, not just because, now it's, an AI generated JD versus an AI generated resume, but the fact that that role is going to invariably change in a pretty short amount of time, and you need to understand whether that person has the ability to learn and grow and adapt
Mhm.
as the role changes. And that role could change for a variety of reasons. First of all, that one bullet point that says, other duties as assigned could easily blow up and take up a significant, double digit percentage of the work. Or you see all these changes in your business model, in the markets that you go after, in the way that you do your manufacturing, and all of these other
Mhm.
elements that go into the sort of variability of the role, which goes back to your very first point around the sort of agility and adaptability of at every level, right? From an individual all the way to the organizational level.
Yes, we could spend another hour talking about the matching things and stuff. But at the end of the day, there's always like if you think about it, virtually an organization is trying to find the one person for that role. Was like that person is trying to find the right best job. And the chances that you find really like the exact perfect magic match is very small. But now we start hiring a lot of people here and there, and like people moving and stuff like that. So maybe it's just like different way to look at it. But yes, yes, yes. And it's not just I mean, to me, like hiring or like internal mobility, it's one of the many, 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 many use cases there are. And actually, there's a lot of use cases that people are not thinking about where I can be useful. Use cases that do not exist necessarily today that actually makes up um, business or other function priorities with HR priorities. I don't know, before we were mentioning strategic workforce planning. When you do strategic workforce planning, a lot of business input is necessary, a lot of finance input is necessary, a lot of like market knowledge is necessary. Um, it's data that lives somewhere in the organization. They might, let's assume they can be somehow available. AI can actually help HR or anyone else to actually just like not say like, well, strategic workforce planning should belong to HR. No, it doesn't belong to HR more than that belong to business, more than belong to finance or anything like that. It belongs to the organization. So how to balance like those information to create like, and then maybe it needs to be called something different, but to do something that will actually be meaningful, purposeful, and usable. AI can probably help with that. Like, hey AI, hey agent AI, create something where you balance skill view of the organization to the financial view of the organization to the market position view of the organization to create a workforce plan that makes sense over the next 18 months. And in that next 18 months, we want three scenarios. One, especially what were the best in the market, and last one, what were the worst in the market. AI can do that in theory, or could do that. But if you just look at it like, "Oh, just do something HR and not look at the rest of the world, it's good, but it's not great. And is it so useful? I'm not sure.
Well, I do think that not enough organizations are doing strategic workforce planning to begin with, but again, that's probably a whole nother
Yeah,
conversation.
another hour.
But you're right. AI can help with that exercise. AI is a factor in how you execute it, right? You need to understand what AI will continue and what capabilities it will gain that you need to incorporate into everything from the work you can accomplish to the skills gaps and things like that. But yeah, I still think, like, as we talked about, a lot of it just comes down to behavior and leadership and culture saying we need to do this for our own competitive advantage, for our own survival. These are things that we need to do because we can't be on our heels.
Hey, we want to be a thriving organization in all sense of the word, not just because our financial are better or like we're growing or this and that, but because our people are great in that organization, because people want to work with us, because other organizations want to partner with us, because people are looking at us as like, wow, this is where innovation is coming from. There's so many reasons,
Yep.
and they're not just like pure financial or business oriented. Um, but at the end of the day, it's like we want to thrive. We want to start an organization. We want people to be proud to work here. We want people to actually, if they're proud to work here, they thrive. guess what? They might actually stay longer.
Wouldn't that be something? Remy, I'm going to leave it there because otherwise we're going to talk for another hour. So I want to be
Yeah.
respectful of your time. This has been great as always. It's great to catch up, and thank you for sharing all your insights with my audience. Really appreciate it.
Bob, it was my pleasure. Thanks again, and really appreciate you giving me a voice here.
Of course, anytime. All right, thanks again, Remy, and thanks everyone for listening. We'll see you next time.